Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the PivotBoss Pre-Market Report for November 18th, 2016. I'm Frank Ochoa, aka PivotBoss. Here's a look at the daily time frame of the ES. Right now, we got price just kind of quietly chugging higher. This is the election day low, big time impulse move higher. We've been holding above the top of the impulse range for the election day 2152 half this entire time. Quietly have chugged higher. Have not seen really much of a signs of rejection. This was an early rejection that we saw here, but when price starts to eat through the midpoint of that day and push through the upper quarter of that range, it just becomes acceptance. So right now we're still continuing to see quiet push higher. You're really not going to see any real strength come out until you see a little bit of a flush of the stops. If this thing were to pull back some, perhaps into 52 or 44, it could be an awesome opportunity for a squeeze here. We'll just see how it continues to play out. 2090, 2091 half, that's the highs right there of the year. So the market's going to be sitting there trying to establish acceptance above the zone and try for 2200. If it can't really get there, we could see a flush right back down. But any pullback in this environment has still been a solid buying opportunity. The S&P has never been too far away from all-time highs. And again, should we squeeze through 2195s, 2200s, the next major upside targets are clearly 2214 and 2240. So we still have some big upside targets to play toward. If we take a look at the intraday time frame right now, there it is. What you see initially right now is that prices at the previous session's close were initially offered. Price came back to these lows, and then we saw an impulse move up, taking out the overnight highs, and now we have this impulse move here. This impulse move has formed after, obviously, the previous session where we mostly quietly trended up in the last couple of days here, back into 2185s. And now we have an impulse range that is formed here. So I would mark this impulse range, key high, key low, mark the midpoint, and now you have the edges for a trading range that is currently in play. And the idea is to fade the edges of that range. Look for failed range expansion, and then look for directional bias as well and play with directional conviction. But right now, fade the edges. That's a nice key range that could help us out the rest of the day. All right, let's take a look at crude oil. Here's crude. We're getting a little bit of a rejection right now. What I wanted to show here in the higher time frame. Here it is. One thing we were talking about in the previous session with our traders was this was a great rejection below 43s, and we've gotten a big move up. We were talking about perhaps getting as high as 48s, but when price started to reject 47s and started to push back below the midpoint of the day at the time, which was much higher, that was an early indication that right now we could be looking at a swing move back across the range toward 43s. We've basically gotten an impulse move from these lows up to these highs. And what I mentioned to our room was if we close with a rejection day like this, then watch the midpoint and the previous highs here, because that could be an opportunity to sell it and bring it back toward the midpoint of this impulse range. So that's another impulse range to mark here, this low to this high and the midpoint of that area. The midpoint of that range right now is 44.66. So I mentioned yesterday to our room that we could be looking at a move toward that midpoint, which is now 44.66. So we'll keep an eye on this right here. This is rejection area. So right now, the median price is 46.30 up to 46.40. 46.41 was the level we were talking about the previous session in the trading room. So that's the absorption point for continuation, perhaps lower. Above that zone, again, squeezes perhaps into 48s. All right, taking a look at the intraday time frame now. You can see in the previous session here, the 46.40s right here, very, very important level, eventually gave it up and closed lower. Right now, we just rallied from the FOMC levels right here all the way back up to 46.40, and we've just been rejected. So this is the first rejection here after a steady push higher. We'll see. At the moment, you have VWAP here in an upward sloping environment, 45.80. This could be a zone here where bulls want to defend and retest 46.40. So If there's any retest and rejection of 46.40 or perhaps a lower high absorption, this could still be the point where bears are looking to defend. Above 46.40, squeezes back to 47.12 and perhaps into 47.25. All right, let's take a look now at gold futures. Here's a look at gold. Let's bring up the daily time frame. We've been gunning for 1200. We've been gunning for 1200, and it hasn't been a smooth ride. You know, the first leg down here got hit with major absorption, and we needed to bounce into the break point first. We got a nice little move, then the election day happened, and since then it's been a continuation downward. So we finally got our move. We got the low of 1201.30. Our target zone was 1200 to 1180, so we could still see more weakness, but this could also be a low. What I mentioned to our room is watch this little range for a breakout, and then that could lead to a test of the range. But you can see off to the left here, these lows at 1210, very, very important. Right now, price is already trading in the upper half of the day, leaving behind a rejection tail so far. And I would say 1210 is now the key level to watch over the next day or two or three, as this perhaps forms some sort of absorption signature that could lead to a steady bounce. So again, I mentioned once we hit 1200 and maybe even as low as 1180, that might be the time to not only bring it back to 1263, but all the way back to 1323. So right here is a very, very important point in the chart. It's hard to tell whether this is perfectly it, but it is the making of what could become a solid reversal pattern. So we'll keep an eye on this 1210 off the 1200s. We want to be able to close well above it, and then over the next day or two, all rotations in the 1210 should be defended for a continuation. All right, let's take a look at the NQ here. There's the NQ. What we see here is basically price holding above the highest FOMC level, 48.04. That's the level we've been gunning for all week. Earlier this week, we said any rotation into 46.90 likely going to be defended, and if so, you're likely going to see this thing work its way up. Once price went bid through the second one, we knew it was headed for the next one up. So we got a nice little continuation, first down, then up, and we still are holding within the election key range. That's very important there, 47.19. So these are the three most important levels on the board right now. And at the moment, we're pushing higher. 48.40 is a short-term area of resistance. If there's any failure to get above that area, we're probably rotating right back to 46.90. If price can push above 48.40, the next one above is 48.80. And that level, anything above it, has been big time rejected so far. So that'll be something to watch for. If we take a look at the intraday time frame here before we head out, you can see right here, price made a nice push higher, broke through the top of this range, rallied, pulled back higher, and closed on highs. And ever since then, we've just been doing a little bit of an expanding range on highs. So 48.40 is very important right now. I would say fade the edges, fade new highs, fade new lows at the moment. If price drops into this LVN, 48.04, 48.06, it's probably a great opportunity to gun for 48.40. So that's an early buy opportunity. So that's what I'm looking at as we head into the rest of the day. All right, everyone, have a happy Friday, and I'll see you soon. Take care.